DJ Davidson came up to me after this morning's sermon, and he's like, I think I've heard some of those stories before. Because poor DJ has to listen to me every Sunday. So if you go to Woodbury Church of Christ, you have to listen to me every Sunday. There are maybe a few things you've heard before, but I only have so many stories. I've only had so many things happen to me. I'm still young. I've got more to experience in life. So there may be a story or two that you've heard before, but that's all right. So if you weren't here this morning, let me just recap this morning's sermon. You're going to wonder why I didn't just do this morning, but the whole sermon can be summed up by saying this: you have eternal life. You have it. Well, I guess I can't speak for you personally, but we have access to it. We have access to it here and now, and that can change things. That can change just about everything in our lives. I want to read this verse with you. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. And I just want to begin to get this idea into our minds as we talk about what we're going to be talking about for just a few minutes. But speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. So I think it's probably fair to say that I am fully a product of church. Like if there's some sort of like machinery and you stick a kid in that machinery and then you work the crank, what comes out the other side? If they've gone to church and they've gone to Sunday school and they've gone to camps and all that, what comes out the other side looks something like this. This is whether or not, for better and maybe for worse, it looks something like this. It's like all the stuff. So I'm pretty much a product of like what happens when you plug a kid into church and you just don't get to, I didn't even realize there was an option to skip church. I didn't realize that was a thing. I remember the very first time we were sitting in a church service and there was a guest speaker and he was going on and on and on. But as a kid, that's just part of it. All the sermons felt like they were going on and on and on and on, right? I mean, just like, come on. And this guy was going on and on and on, and he said something in the middle of his sermon. We didn't know it was the middle. It felt like it should have been about, 2/3 past. And he was like, I know you want me to wrap it up, but I'm not going to wrap it up. And I remember my mom, she was just kind of steamed, and she got us all up and walked us out because she was so mad. And I was like, oh, you can leave? I didn't know that was an option. It opened up a world of possibilities. My mom doesn't remember this, and you can ask her about it afterwards. She's not going to remember. I've tried to make a special moment to just, give you guys a little insight into my parents at each point. So that's another little insight. My mom does not remember. 10th and Tyler, little kid. It was a big deal. Oh, we can leave church? What? Are you kidding? And now I know there's people that don't go to church at all. I'm like, what? Are you kidding? How is that even possible? Not go to church. That doesn't make any sense. But I'm a product of church. So when it's kind of like this, parents, kids, you kind of get this now too. When I went to church, my parents would show up and we would go in the door, and that was the last time I would see them until we left. And what would happen when you leave is your parents come to you and they would be like, Patrick, we're leaving, which as a kid, you knew you had about 45 minutes, maybe an hour left when they said they were leaving because they were going to talk to somebody. I remember getting in the car and I remember seeing that one person come over and I remember thinking, oh boy, we're going to be another 2 hours here. That's church. That's church life. It's all of it, right? It's everything. We look when we try to check out other churches. Sometimes when you go on vacation. By the way, did you know there are people who, when they go on vacation, they don't go to church? I didn't know you did that. We went on vacation to church. Our vacation was retreats and camps and stuff like that. That was just it. It was just mind-blowing to find out that there were people who took a break, took a vacation from church. It's terrible now, and I'm not bragging. This isn't a brag, but when I go on vacation, I love church so much that I'll find an early service somewhere and a later service somewhere, and if they have a Saturday night service, I'll go to that service. I was doing a little greeting at a church I went to for the first time because they didn't have a greeter, so I just stood at the door greeting people as they came in. Just all of it. I love it. I love the whole experience. I actually slept in pews growing up, not during sermons, but I mean my parents would be doing stuff and it would be late and I would fall asleep in the pew. I mean, that's church. That's church life. That's church experience. When you try to think of the whole ball of wax, it's not just theology. It's the whole life. It's every different little piece and part of it. I'll tell you one last quick story. I was at a camp. And again, camps, man, there would be 5 sermons a day 2 sermons in the morning, a sermon in the afternoon, a sermon at night, just sermon after sermon after sermon. And this one guy was preaching, and he was preaching away, and it was going pretty long, and even people that enjoyed preaching were starting to get to the point where like, all right, come on, this is getting a little ridiculous. And the preacher could tell. And this is what he said to the audience. He said, hey, I can tell some of you are getting a little uneasy out there, but he said, ladies, when you're baking a cake, you don't take it out of the oven too soon, do you? And there was this pause, and somebody from the audience says, the cake is burnt. I love it. I love it. Every bit of church experience. So, and there's good, there's bad, there's ugly. It's all part and parcel of the whole thing, right? It's all of it. And I'm here for the full experience of church. There's moments that are incredibly beautiful. Moments where you see transformation in somebody. Moments where just kind of the light goes on and somebody sort of gets it. It just makes sense to them. And then there's moments that are hard. Moments where relationships are difficult and where people get under your skin. I mean, all of it. It's all church. It's all this church life. It's this whole thing. Every piece of it. So I'm here for the full experience. And what I want to do as we talk about this is I want to take the idea that we tried to broach this morning is an eternal perspective, and then ask the question of what does that eternal perspective look like when we apply it specifically to the things that we do, this body, this family, of this gathering of believers. What does that look like? So let's narrow our focus just a little bit. For a while I had a 1992 Toyota Tercel. They don't even make them anymore. And it's 1992, it was good old crank, windows, nothing special. And somebody had given it to me because I had a car that had fallen apart, and they said, well, I have this old car I'm not using, you can use it. And I was very grateful that someone had given me this Tercel. But this thing went from about 0 to 30 in about 60, 70 minutes. And so you would hit the gas and you'd just be like, all right, it's going to take a little while. And if there was any incline in the road at all, you just lost speed, just a little bit of incline. And so I would try to get on the highway and I would be in the right lane, and I would just be apologizing to people even though they couldn't hear me. And I'd be like, just please pass me. I'm so sorry. These, older people in Oldsmobiles would be looking at me like, what are you doing? I'm trying as hard as I can. And if I was a little worried that I would just get to this point where the car would actually start going backwards. And I was like, this is all I got. It's a free car. It's all I got. I'm trying as hard as I can. My across the street neighbor was a car magician, just an incredible guy with cars. And I come home one day and I pull into the driveway and I get a call and I pull it out. It's my across the street neighbor and he's on the phone. You could have just come outside, but whatever. And he says, you need to check your spark plugs. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, I heard you driving down the road. You need to check your spark plugs. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking as I'm Googling what are spark plugs. I was thinking the same thing. And so he came over and we looked through this, and this may not even be a thing, so you guys that know cars can tell me this, but there's 4 spark plugs in this little car, one of them was working. One. So, in other words, it wasn't even as good as a riding lawnmower. There was just no power to this car. And he came over and he's like, whatever, fixing everything. And I got back in the car and I, hit the gas pedal and the thing moved. And I was like, oh, this is what it's like. This is amazing. And of course, my top speed is still only 50 miles an hour. But I was like, I'm flying. I felt like I was driving NASCAR. It was incredible because everything was working like it was supposed to be. Everything was firing, all cylinders, full cylinders, whatever the vernacular is. I take my car into the shop, as you guys can tell. You guys are like, this guy doesn't know cars. Exactly. Whatever it is. It was working and it felt great. It was awesome to drive. I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of times when we're at church will always work. It will always work, but we're not always operating at full capacity. It will always work. God always blesses, He loves, He cares. It's always awesome, but sometimes we're not operating at full capacity. And sometimes as a church, we're operating on one spark plug or muffler bearings or whatever other things that go along with cars. I don't know. Whatever it is. We're not operating at full capacity. And I think what happens is we get ourselves in this frame of mind where if God could just come along, get under the hood, fix a few things, we could be firing on all cylinders, and church would be awesome. It's still going to work. I want you to hear that. It's always going to work. Where 2 or 3, I get that. but we want church to just be the way God intended it to be having the impact in our communities, on our lives, on our families' lives, the way that He intended it to work. And so we want to talk about what that looks like this afternoon. So we're going to be looking at this Ephesians passage, and we're going to be looking at a couple different key phrases in this verse. It's a really interesting idea, the way that Paul weaves together some of these ideas. So I want you to see this. Just three quick things out of Ephesians chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. He says, from whom the whole body being fitted, and I want you to note that word, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. When I read this verse, what it sounds like to me is a church firing on all cylinders. That's what this verse sounds like. Like this is working. It's always good. It's always going to work. But here is something that's really extra special. Like you've seen it. You've been a part of it. You've been in moments where you're like, I love what's happening here. Or you've visited churches where you're like, wow, there is something in the water. Something good is happening here. And I think this is what Paul is talking about in this passage. I don't know if any of you guys ever shop at IKEA. Any big IKEA fans? Anybody you know what IKEA is, right? Yeah, of course. IKEA makes furniture that is going to fall apart in about 18 months. That's what IKEA makes. And it's beautiful because when you walk into IKEA and you go upstairs and they have everything well lit and displayed and it's all arranged and you get all these ideas and all these hopes and dreams for what your house could look like if you just had that shelf or that table or that lampstand. And then okay, I've got to write down the number. If you've shopped at IKEA, it's a whole experience. I got to write down the number, then I got to go downstairs and I got to find that particular product. And then you get these boxes and you take them home, and that's where the real fun begins, because then you lay these boxes out on the ground and then you open up the instructions, and the instructions don't have any words. They're just pictures. And you're like, oh, I like comics, I like pictures. But when it comes to putting together a shelf, you need some words and you've just got pictures and you're trying to piece together different things. And if you are anything like me, I'm not the most mechanically inclined, as you can tell from my Tercel story, then you end up trying to put this thing together and you put this thing in wrong, and then there's leftover pieces and you broke off a part and you hope it's going to work, and it ends up, IKEA is beautiful, but at the end of the day, it's junk. Right? Can we say that? Is that okay? It's junk. I don't know. Maybe your whole house is furnished with IKEA. It's junk. Here's what I'm saying, is that you are never going to hear this phrase. Son, this shelf from IKEA came from your grandfather and his grandfather before him, and now I am handing it down to you. IKEA will never be a family heirloom because it's particle board glued together, and it's going to last until somebody puts a little bit of water on it and it just falls apart into pieces. That's IKEA furniture. There's pieces left over. There's things that don't fit. I know, user error. I get that. There's just all kinds of whatever, right? That's IKEA furniture. I got to remember to use this thing. Sorry, I keep forgetting. And this is what happens to IKEA furniture after a little while. Well, it's free because the drawers don't fit. They fell apart. Something happened. Couldn't hold, the weight of the socks or whatever. IKEA furniture. I think what Paul is trying to get us to understand out of Ephesians chapter 4 is that the church is nothing like that. Now, there are definitely some people with some screws loose at church, right? There are some oddballs. There's some pieces that you don't understand exactly how they fit. But according to this verse, we are perfectly, as a church body, we are perfectly crafted, handcrafted. We are being built into something that is beautiful and wonderful. The whole body, the word is fitted together. The whole body is fitted together. And what Paul's doing is he's actually tapping in, and I love this kind of stuff, so I apologize if this isn't your thing, but he's weaving an idea throughout the letter to the book of Ephesians. So this isn't the first time he's brought up this idea of craftsmanship. In Ephesians chapter 2, for we are his workmanship. We are this beautifully handcrafted piece of furniture that he is putting together and he is building into something. And we don't see how it's all working together, but we are his workmanship. We were created in Christ Jesus for good works. Ephesians 2:21, we are carefully joined together We are carefully pieced together. He's not shoving us. There's not glue. It's not particle board. We're carefully pieced together to make something deliberate and important. It's very, very specific language that he's using. He's trying to get us to understand that the church is carefully crafted. And I think we need to know that. Because sometimes when we look around, we're like, yeah, I like these people, but I don't know. We're a little bit more IKEA than we are handcrafted furniture. I love them, but I don't know how I don't really know that they fit. Maybe they're a little extra or leftover or whatever. I'm not sure that it all fits together to make something really, really nice. But he's saying in the church, there's no leftover parts. There's no particle board members. There's no disposable pieces. That's not the way that it works. Every piece is fitted together. In the first church that I worked at full-time was in Centerville, Iowa. Some of you know of it. And it's a church that for many people was sort of like they would go to school in Ottumwa and they would preach in Centerville and then move on to something else. And it was just sort of, I don't want to say overlooked because there's some wonderful, beautiful people, but it was just something that they did until they did something else. And there were a lot of people that maybe at first glance you'd be like, I don't know, maybe they're a little bit extra parts and left over and a few oddballs here and there. Definitely were. One gentleman, we ended up living right next door to him when my wife and I first moved there, and his name was Ron Terrell, and he was a Jehovah's Witness at the time, and he was so excited to have a preacher move next door because he was going to convert me and then convert the whole church, and he told me that, like first time I met him, hi, I'm Jehovah's Witness, I'm going to convert you and then convert the whole church. Okay, I like that plan. All right, so he wanted to get together all the time and talk about all the Jehovah's Witness stuff, and it was always this stuff. So we had these studies for about a year, and it's nothing to do with me. I'm not smart enough to convert anybody like that, but I just remember at the end of this one discussion, he's like, you know what? That stuff doesn't make any sense. I'm coming to church with you. Oh, great. It was God, totally God. God's like, oh, here he is piecing things together, piecing little things together. Happens to use me, but it wasn't anything I said or did. And Ron, when he started coming, his wife decided to come because she didn't want to have anything to do with the Jehovah's Witness church, but she was like, yeah, I'll go to church. I'll go to that one because that one's weird. And so she started coming to church, and then their grown children and her husband and grandchildren, and then he invited his friend. And I remember sitting down one time and counting out all the people that had been brought to church by Ron Terrell, who was a little bit different. And it was something like 35 people that had joined church because of this kind of goofy guy. And then I wrote down all the people that had joined church because of me, and it was a lot less. And I'm the full-time guy, and God was using Ron. Maybe he was a little different, maybe he was a little odd, but God was using him. He was perfectly fitted for the work that God wanted to use him for. It's amazing. It's incredible when you are able to step back and begin to see that. The church is perfectly crafted. But secondly, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15 goes on, and I love this. I tell you, I love this. From whom the whole body being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies. By what every joint supplies. This is an interesting word he uses here because we tend to think that, oh, you get someone that's really talented or someone that's really good and they're going to really make things happen. But the real magic isn't in that individual. The real magic is in the joint, in the relationship, in the connection. That's a hinge. That's two pieces being fitted together to make something else happen. Let me give you an example. We had in Woodbury, we had a single mom who was coming to church, four daughters, and she came. She knew a few people at Woodbury, and she was there a little while and decided to check out a different church. And somebody followed up, like, well, you know, what was wrong? And she was like, well, you know, I didn't really care for the kids' programs, and I didn't like the preaching. Ouch, that was me. It wasn't a fit. Didn't really like it. Hurts, right? You want everybody to love church. You want everybody to see it the way you do. So she went to this other congregation for about a year, and about a year later, my wife, Corrine, happened to run into her in a grocery store or something, and they were just chatting, and this single mom with 4 daughters was going to be moving soon. And she happened to mention that in passing, and Corrine says, oh, you're moving? We'll have a crew over. When are you moving? We'll just bring people over and help you move. And she was so blown away by that. She said, I've been dropping hints at my current church that I've been moving, and nobody has said anything. And here I mention it just in passing to you, and you've got a whole crew, and there's people here in this room that were part of helping her move. And she said, that's church, that's community. It's not the preaching. It's not necessarily the kids program. All those things are awesome, but it's that community. And here's the thing, Corrine didn't even help her move. She just got a bunch of other people to do it. She played a role. She was a joint. She had a connection. And then she figured out, how do we make this work? How do we make something happen? And that mom and her girls have rejoined our church, and they're part of our church family and our church community. It's the joints. It's the joints where the magic happens. These are the invaluable points of connection where our skills and our resources have an impact greater than the sum of its parts. It's a joint. Jonathan is back there running tech. He could totally derail this sermon if he wanted to, right? He could totally I'm just going to throw some Star Wars clips up there while this guy's preaching, and then you guys would be like, what's happening? What's going on? He could totally derail it. But when he plays a role by getting everything working in the way that it's supposed to be, then you guys get to see a verse or a picture that I've decided might be helpful. That's a joint. That's something greater than the sum of its parts. He could turn off my microphone and I would have to shout louder. That's a joint. Those are people working together to make something greater than the sum of its parts happen. Someone replaces the light bulbs in this room so that you can see when someone's speaking or when someone's teaching. Someone does that. You may not know who that is, but someone does that. Someone gives money so that light bulbs can be replaced. Someone teaches so that you can be in here on a Sunday morning listening and learning and being discipled, and that your kids are discipled in an age-appropriate way. Someone does those things, and those are the joints that make something greater than the sum of its parts. Those are the things that work together to make something bigger happen. But there's hundreds of things. You know that. There's hundreds of things that happen to make church work that you don't even think about. You don't even think about. Somebody fills the communion cups with grape juice. Somebody does that. We had a bad snow a couple weeks ago, and we actually canceled services. Hate doing that. It feels like I'm going against God, but it was, heavy snow. It's warmer here than it is back home, by the way. Did you know that? I keep looking at my app, and it's like 50-some degrees here, and it's 40-some degrees. Balmy Bemidji is what it is. Anyway, we canceled services this one day, and the gentleman who fills our communion cups, he gets there at like 5:30 a.m. And that grape juice is already turned to wine by the time we actually get it, because it's been out so long. It's like he's ready to go. And I was like, Rick, buddy, I'm so sorry, but we're going to cancel church. He's like, well, what am I supposed to do with all this grape juice? And then jokingly, I was like, we can drink it. He's like, well, that's a lot of grape juice. No, we can pour it back in. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll all work out. But somebody pours the grape juice so that you can maybe have a moment thinking about the crucifixion of Christ without having to do that yourself. Somebody else does that. And they make something else happen. And here's the thing, it's like a snowball effect. When we play our little role, whatever that is, it allows somebody else to do something. Maybe it's bigger, maybe it's not, it's just something different. And that allows somebody else to do something. And that allows somebody else. That's the church working together, being built up by what every joint supplies, by what every member plays, the role that they play. To make things happen. There are hundreds of things. There are prayers being prayed, conversations being had, people being helped, floors being swept, cars being repaired, whatever it is. And this is all fitted together by what every joint supplies to make the church something bigger than the sum of those individual parts. And sometimes we get tired of doing our thing. Oh, nobody notices. I teach the kids every week and nobody says thank you, and the kids aren't paying attention and whatever. I've taught youth group for 13 years, and there have been some kids that I thought were not paying attention. And there have been many kids who were not paying attention. They just totally were not. But I remember speaking to this kid who's now an adult and now has a child of his own, still comes to church, and he was saying, do you remember when you taught that lesson 7 years ago? And he named the lesson and my jaw dropped. Are you kidding? You were listening? I am like, validate everything that I had been doing. But here's the thing, all those different roles, all those different parts, we grow weary in doing well. We do. It's just the way that we are because we don't see the cumulative effect that we are able to have because we're playing this little role. We're just sweeping a floor. We're just doing dishes. We're just taking out the trash. But we don't understand how that is a joint that makes other things happen. And it turns into this big, beautiful thing that's fitted together called the church. It's a beautiful thing, and we just don't always see it. The power is in the joints. Number 3. From whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. This is so helpful. And I think eternal perspective is the key to seeing this bigger picture. It's so funny that we do this, but when we have people teach kids classes, we think like, oh yeah, let's have somebody go teach kids classes so that the parents can really do important things in here. But aren't the people teaching the kids classes the most valuable? Isn't that the most valuable thing going on? Some person who is discipling a young heart. I mean, it's so formative. And these what we're doing out here, oh yeah, it's valuable and it's important. But I mean, you're talking about someone that is like shaping a young heart and a young mind. That is so important, so valuable. Those are the things that are going to bear fruit later on in life. So you're not just teaching a kids class. You're allowing parents to learn without distraction. You're discipling young children. You're freeing up other parents to preach and teach. It's all fitted together. I don't know who shovels the snow here. I have no idea. Maybe you do. But somebody shovels the snow. Oh, it's not any big deal, just shoveling snow. But if that person didn't do it, and people can't get inside, or they destroy the carpet because it's all muddy or dirty or wet or whatever it is, you're not just shoveling snow. You're making it possible for people to participate in what's going on. You're making it possible for people to worship. You're making it possible for someone to experience transformation, maybe to hear something that they need to hear, that they've never heard that way before. And every time you shovel a scoop of snow, you need to think like, this is my part in the bigger picture. Every time you teach a child, every time you sweep a floor, every time you take out a bag of trash, every time you pick up something that isn't yours or clean up a little kid's room. I mean, little kids, man, they make a mess. And you gotta go, oh man, they dumped all the toys out again. I gotta go clean them up. As you know, I don't know if this happens here, but back home, somebody sanitizes all the toys in the little kids' room. You know why? Because kids are like germ-ridden, infested centers of disease, right? And somebody's like, we don't want to spread that. Just clean that. Somebody does that. Nobody knows about it. Nobody thanks them. They don't get their name in the bulletin, but somebody does that, but it allows all these other things to happen. It's the cumulative effect that allows the growth of the body, the growth of itself, building itself up in love. That's such an important idea. Everything that we do and everything that we don't do matters. It matters. Every little thing. It matters. When we don't play our part, I think what ends up happening is that it's like that car that's driving on one cylinder. Yes, the church is still going to make it. It's still going to work, but it's going to take a lot more effort and time to get there. But when every piece is coming together, it's something that's beautiful. And so here's my challenge is that we all just be willing to play those roles, whatever they are, however big or small, whatever we think is important. Sometimes we think the guy getting up and speaking is important. I'll be lucky if you guys remember what I said by Tuesday, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. And I get that it's valuable and it's important, but it's no more important than the person who's cleaning and the person who's disinfecting and the person who's teaching the kids and the person who's shoveling snow and the person who's running slides and the person who's whatever it is. It's no more important than any of those things. It's every piece coming together for the building up of itself in love. That's a beautiful thing. And I think what we need to do sometimes when we're sitting there thinking like, is this worth it? I'm not seeing the results. I'm not seeing anything. Is we need to step back And we need to see this for what it is, from this eternal perspective, to see what God is doing, to see how God is piecing together this beautiful thing. And to think about those people that we might think are like leftovers and they don't quite fit, and figure out what is the role that God has for them to play in the church. This is so important, and I was just thinking about this afternoon, about individuals who volunteer to do things that are unsung heroes, but God happened to find them the exact role that fit their personality and their desire, and it was that joint that opened up something else for others to do what needed to be done. So let's be those people that help the church fire on all cylinders. It can be leading songs, but it can be cleaning up a mess. It can be picking up somebody for church. It can be a million different things, but we play those roles. So Ephesians 4:16, from whom the whole body being fitted, perfectly fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body. And here's the deal. When we play that role, we benefit from that. We benefit from it. When we play our role and we allow God to use us the way that He has fitted us together.